Hi friends, it's me, Miss Borek, and I'm back. I'm back to read the very last chapter of our book that we've been working on. Do you remember what it's called? Flat Stanley, His Original Adventures. And today we are going to finish this book. I'm so excited. It's been such a pleasure to read with you. I hope that you have followed along with me. You have filled out all the maps. You've completed all your homework, whether on Google Classroom or in a journal or on a random piece of paper. Make sure you're learning along with me. Right now, I want you to hit the pause button, grab a paper and pencil, and copy down what you see behind me. Today's focus question is, why did Stanley not want to be flat anymore? I thought he liked being flat. Today we're going to use what we call a multi-flow map. And this might be new to you, but I'm going to tell you how it works, okay? So in the middle, we have an event, something that happened. And what we have is Stanley does not want to be flat anymore. We need to come up with the causes and the effects for that event. Why does he feel that way? And what happens because he feels that way? So as we read today, that's your job. Figure out why. What is causing Stanley to not want to be flat anymore? Those will go here in the because side of our multi-flow map. And then he does something because he doesn't want to be flat anymore. And that's what we're going to write on that side of the flow map. Okay, guys? So make sure that you have your thinking brains on. Make sure that you are ready to learn. Are you ready? Okay, good. Arthur's good idea. Who's Arthur? Do you guys remember? Which character is... You're right. It's his brother. It's Stanley's little brother. Do you guys remember how we described Arthur at one point in this book? You're right. He was jealous and he was mad. But people change. Characters in books change. And Arthur kind of got over his jealousy and his anger and his envy for his flat brother. All right, let's read about Arthur's good idea. For a while, Stanley Lambchop was famous. Everywhere that Stanley went, people stared and pointed at him. He could hear them whisper, "Over there, over there, over there, Agnes! That must be Stanley Lambchop, the one that caught those sneak thieves!" And things like that. But after a few weeks, all of the whispering, it all started to stop. People had other things to think about. Stanley didn't mind. Being famous had been fun, but enough was enough. And then came a further change. And it was not a pleasant change. People began to laugh and make fun of him. People began to laugh and make fun of him. They would say, "Hello, super skinny." And they would shout and they would even yell even ruder things about the way that he looked. I wonder if that might be something that's causing our friend Stanley to not want to be flat anymore. People are saying mean things to him. Gosh, I want you guys to imagine for a second. How would that feel if somebody made fun of the way that you looked? I know that would make me feel really sad. I wouldn't like it at all. I would also probably want to change the way I looked if somebody made fun of me. I hope his brother has a really good idea to help. Stanley told his parents how he felt. "It's the other kids mostly that I mind," he said. "They don't like me anymore because I'm flat. I'm different." "Shame on them," said Mrs. Lambchop. "It is wrong to dislike people for their shapes or their religion, for that matter, or even the color of their skin." That's something we've talked about before, right? None of those things matter. Not the color of your skin, not the color of your eyes or your hair, or what you like to believe in. None of that matters. What matters is what's in here. What kind of a person are you? What kind of person are they? That's what's important. Get to know people. "I know," Stanley said, "only maybe it's impossible for everybody to like everybody." "Well, perhaps," said Mrs. Lambchop, "but they sure can try." Later that night, Arthur Lambchop... Let me back up and read that again. My mouth got ahead of my brain. Good readers always back up and try it again. Later that night, Arthur Lambchop was woken by the sound of crying. In the darkness, he crept across the room and he knelt by Stanley's bed. "Are you okay?" Arthur asked his brother. Go away, said Stanley. Don't be mad at me, Arthur, said to his little brother. You're still mad because I got you tangled in that tree the other day with the kite? Skip it, will you? Stanley said. I'm not mad. Just go away. Please, let's be friends. Arthur couldn't help but crying a little too. Oh, Stanley, he said, please tell me what's wrong. Wow, Arthur's being a really good brother. Doesn't seem like he's jealous or mad anymore. He sure has changed. Stanley waited for a long time before he spoke. The thing is, he said, I'm just not happy anymore. I'm tired of being flat. I want to be a regular shape again like all the other people. But I have to be going on forever, just flat, and it makes me sick. Oh, Stanley, said Arthur. He dried his tears in the corner of Stanley's sheets, and he could only think of nothing more to say, except, Don't talk about what I just said, Stanley told his brother. I don't want the folks to worry. What's another word for folks? Parents or mom and dads, you're right. That would only make it worse. You're brave, Arthur said. You really are. He took a hold of Stanley's hand. The two brothers sat together in the darkness, being friends. They were both still and sad, but each one felt a little better than they had before. And then suddenly, though he was not even trying to think, Arthur had an idea. He jumped up and he turned on the light and he ran to the big storage box where they kept all the toys and all of their things. And he began to rummage in the back. Rummage means to kind of like look around. Stanley sat up in the bed to watch. Arthur flung aside a football and some not lead soldiers. Let me back up. Some lead soldiers and an airplane and lots of wooden blocks. And then he said, aha! He had found what he wanted, an old bicycle pump. Say what? Let's look at this again really quickly. Why does Stanley not want to be flat anymore? Do you know? Do we have the cause yet? Yes. As sad as it is, he doesn't want to be flat anymore because the kids are making fun of him. The kids are being mean. Kids are being mean. That is what is causing Stanley to not want to be flat anymore. He doesn't want to be who he is because of how people are treating him. That makes me so sad. But I think his brother has an idea to help him solve that problem. Let's see what they do to help solve the problem. So Stanley does not want to be flat anymore because kids are being mean. So, what are they going to do? Let's keep reading and find out. Aha! He found what he wanted, an old bicycle pump. He held it up and Stanley and him looked at each other. Okay, said Stanley at last, but take it easy. He put the end of the long pump hose in his mouth and he clamped his lips up tightly so that no air could escape. I'll go really slow, said Arthur. What do you think they're going to do with the pump in his mouth? Oh my gosh, that sounds like a really bad idea. Don't try this at home. It's not safe, I promise you. If it hurts or anything, just wiggle your hand at me. He began to pump. At first, nothing happened except Stanley's cheeks bulged a little bit. Arthur watched his hand, but there was no wiggle signal, so he just kept pumping. Then suddenly Stanley's top half began to swell. It's working! It's working! Shouted Arthur, pumping away. Stanley spread his arms so that he could get as much air inside him more easily. He got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the buttons of his pajamas began to burst. Pop, pop, pop! Oh my gosh. At a moment more, and he was all rounded out. their plan's working. But not his right foot. His right foot stayed flat. That's silly. Arthur stopped pumping. It's like trying to do the very last bit of those long balloons, he said. Maybe a shake will help. Stanley shook his right foot twice, and with a little whooshing sound, it swelled up to match the left foot. There stood Stanley Lambchop as he used to be, as if he had never been flat at all. Wow, I think it worked. Thank you, Arthur, Stanley said. Thank you very much. The brothers were shaking hands when Mr. Lambchop strode into the room with Mrs. Lambchop right behind him. We heard you, said Mr. Lambchop, up and talking when you ought to be asleep, huh? Shame on you. George, said Mrs. Lambchop, Stanley's all round again. You're right, said Mr. Lambchop, noticing Stanley was back to normal. Good for you, Stanley. I'm the one that did it, said Arthur. I blew him up, or pumped him up. Everyone was terribly excited and happy, of course. Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate the occasion. And several toasts were drunk to Arthur and his cleverness. He's smart. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the boys back into their beds and kissed them. And then they turned off the light. Good night, they said. Good night, said Stanley and Arthur. It had been a long and tiring day. Very soon, all of the Lambchops were asleep. The end. That's the end of our story, guys. Wasn't that awesome? I am so excited that Stanley was able to blow himself back up and be normal again. I hope he's feeling better. Let's look at our map one last time before I go. Why did Stanley not want to be flat anymore? Stanley does not want to be flat because kids are being mean to him. So, how did they solve that problem? What did they do because he was feeling so sad? You're right. They pumped him up with a bicycle pump. So, they pumped. Can you guys see? Yep. They pumped him up. And it worked. It made him back to normal, and I bet you that made him feel a little bit better about himself. But I want you guys to know, it does not matter what other people think of you. It does not matter what other people say about you. What matters is what's in here and what's in here. You be you. Don't worry about what anybody says, okay? You already know that because Miss Borek tells you that all the time, right? We love each other. We're kind to each other. And if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, right? But if somebody does say something mean to you, just ignore them. I love you. Thank you for tuning in. I miss you so much, and I'm so hoping to get back to school soon. I'll see you soon, guys. Bye. Love you.